Hello, I'm Annalouise, and today I'm going to be talking about feelings of intimidation. And I'm joined by my very special guests, Dog and Bear. It'll all become clear why Dog and Bear are joining me today. So, feelings of intimidation. I'm going to be talking about being able to more clearly recognize when we're starting to feel intimidated, and also to be able to notice more finely when other people are feeling intimidated, and the strategies that we all adopt when we start coming into that territory, and giving us some ideas of how to more consciously release that intimidation and come into more connection and relate it, like truthful relating. And I'm going to be providing you some personal stories from my last week in this territory that's led me to record this video. Why do I think it's important to talk about intimidation? I think intimidation runs through our whole society on so many levels. It can start very young with power over in terms of children and behaviour, and it can work up into whole societies and governments and companies and organisations, and it can absolutely work at a close level, a relating level every day in our lives. And for me, when we're operating either in a sense of feeling intimidated or intimidating consciously or unconsciously, it strips away our human connection, it strips away our vulnerability, it strips away our ability to be really present and compassionate. And so it's just a lovely territory to be able to become more and more finely aware, finely tuned and aware of, so that we can see when we're just starting to come into intimidation, what we can do, and being able to support other people in the journey too. So how does that sound? I hope it sounds good. So let's get started by a little bit of self-exploration. So let's start with what situations tend to trigger intimidation for us? What comes to mind just when I say that? And if I were to invite us to think about what sort of people do we tend to feel intimidated by, what would come up there? And then what sort of activities, like are there any particular activities that feel more intimidating? I think recording these videos can be intimidating. Certainly posting something on YouTube for the first time was intimidating. So that gives us a flavour, and while we're with that, I invite us just to feel what happens in our body when we touch into those territories of intimidation. So you might want to close your eyes if you're not driving or doing something that requires your eyes to be open, and just notice what's happened just by thinking about these territories. Do you notice any contraction, any tension? If so, where do you feel it in your body? Are there any emotions? Maybe nervousness or fear? What's your sort of sense of alertness? You know, that flight fight response. Is there a greater sense of alertness going on in your system or not? Do you feel really open and expansive or less so? And what else do you notice? So when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Feel free to pause this video and post comments below so everyone can share of what you notice when you feel intimidated, and also the situations which are triggering. It's all interesting information. So that gives us a sense of what happens in our systems, and I think we're all different. When we're intimidated, we tend to strategize it differently. Like some people, when they're intimidated, might go more into a sense of forward and perhaps even more aggressive to overcome those feelings of intimidation. And other people might withdraw and get more shy and more like nervous. And we might operate differently in different situations as well. I notice sometimes with new skills, sometimes I just want to dive straight in. That's a bit intimidating, but I just want to dive straight in. And other times I'm like a little bit like, oh, wanting to try and avoid. So different situations might call up different responses in us. So that gives us a flavour of what intimidation feels like for ourselves. Another good insight, I think, is being able to witness in others how their responses are when they're intimidated. So let's for a moment imagine we've walked into a group of people, perhaps we're in a workshop, and you're noticing that some people in the group seem to be a little bit intimidated. What markers do you see? Perhaps someone's not talking very much. Perhaps they're keeping themselves to themselves. They might be looking down. They might be taking lots of notes. Or they might be talking a lot and talking really fast. And yeah, there are so many different markers. And what's so beautiful, I think, is finding ways that we can relax our intimidation response and also help relax it in others so that we can come into greater truth. And I'm going to tell you my first little story. Over the last few weeks, I've been noticing with a friend that I was getting intimidated by how much exercise he was doing. He was doing a lot of yoga and then going for really long bike rides. And I was starting to feel quite intimidated whenever I was hearing more about the exercise he was doing. And what it was triggering in me was this sense of inadequacy at my own physicality and the level of exercise I was doing. Anyway, in the end, I was leaving a message for him and saying, you know, what I'm noticing is that I'm quite intimidated by the strength you have for physical exercise and the capacity for physical exercise. And I was laughing at myself as I named it. And when I stopped leaving the message, I noticed something really had relaxed in myself by naming those feelings that I was having. Something had opened and relaxed. And then later in the day, or the next day, he left a message for me, and he was really compassionately honouring my feelings around the intimidation. And also he named how he found some of the things I do intimidating. And when he said that, it just really softened my heart, and it really felt like, it was almost like layers were dropping away between us. It felt like energetically there was this just stripping away, and there was more transparency and connection. Even though we weren't actually speaking at that moment, it was just like messages left for each other. And so this, I think, is one of the first ways that we can break the cycle of feeling intimidated. We can break the cycle of feeling intimidated by just naming our discomfort and our intimidation. And what's beautiful about that is that potentially it invites other people to be able to come into their own ease around where they're feeling uncomfortable. And even if it doesn't, it might highlight the patterns a little bit more clearly, and so we can be more open and compassionate to whatever strategies someone might be running if they're feeling intimidated. And when someone's running a pattern of intimidating others, it's very easy to feel intimidated by that, right? Like they might be running a pattern of power, of control, of putting people down, perhaps speaking very loudly, aggressively. So we can be intimidated by that. And yet the likelihood is that if someone's running those patterns, they themselves are feeling intimidated. And they're operating those patterns in order to feel more safe in some way. And if we can recognize that when we're feeling perhaps a little bit intimidated by someone else's strategies around power and control, and we can feel into their vulnerability and their fear, we can relax and soften. And then, in my experience, if I can relax and soften, then the likelihood is that person will also feel less need for control and aggressive behavior. Yeah. But sometimes it can be hard, right? Can you think of an occasion where you felt intimidated by someone, perhaps someone who feels powerful or strong to you? And those feelings can be strong, can't they? They can be. We can feel like we're a little bit trapped by our intimidation. So yeah, being able to open out, see their potential intimidation and soften, allows something to relax and release. And that leads me into my next little story. I was in this sound bath session the other night, and there were quite a few people there, and on the other side of the room there was this really beautiful woman. She was really well dressed, her hair was gorgeous, she was really pretty, she was like sitting really elegantly, and I was like, oh, curious, I'm feeling a little bit intimidated by her presence, by her beauty and everything else. And so I just sat with that in myself. And that softened something in me. And suddenly I could see through some of those layers that she perhaps was carrying. And I could sense that underneath some of those layers was this like vulnerability in this part of her that wasn't entirely comfortable. But the external had become a way for her to somehow inhabit a more comfortable space. This is what it felt like. I mean, obviously I don't know, but this is what it sort of felt like. And that helped soften my heart and just really feel this shared humanhood. And I didn't end up speaking to her, but if I had done, having gone through that little journey with myself, I feel like I could have come into a connection with her in a more transparent way. So it's just interesting, isn't it? The amount of times when we might be feeling intimidation of different flavors, and noticing those and getting curious and being able to invite other people into a greater sense of safety. And another way of doing that, and this is why Dog and Bear are here today, is that humour and lightheartedness, I think, is one of the best antidotes to intimidation. Because if we don't take ourselves too seriously, then generally we're not likely to be very intimidating. And also it can just really soften and relax the situation. So that's why Dog and Bear are here. Because I think, right, it's hard to feel intimidated when you're looking at this beautiful bear. Oh, sorry, dog. Sorry, dog. So dogs themselves, they can be intimidating, right? Dogs can be like barky, yappy, like aggressive, and that's intimidating. Or they can be like this soft, cute Labrador who's just loving and you're not the slightest bit intimidating. So that's in a way a good model for us humans, isn't it? To think how we can show up in less intimidation if we imagine ourselves a bit more like a Labrador, a soft, playful Labrador, instead of like perhaps a more aggressive and angry dog. And when we notice ourselves going into those slightly more yappy or aggressive strategies in ourselves because we might be feeling a little bit scared in a situation, we can invite our inner Labrador back, and also a sense of humour. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I would so love you to share it with anyone that you think might enjoy it, or people who work with groups, or people who might be feeling intimidated, anyone who might appreciate it. And if you want to hear more about my work, you can go to www.resonating.love and you can subscribe to my newsletter. And you can also subscribe to the channel and get notifications by pressing the little bell. And I'd appreciate if you press like if you have done. And sending you a lot of curiosity and inquiry around when you start to feel intimidated, what sort of situations, with what sort of people, and see what helps you come into a place of greater safety and transparency and honesty. And do post below any of your insights so we can all learn together. Sending you so much love and light and freedom in this human life and animal life.